So let's talk about some of the individual policies. When I look down the ones that he really ran on, the centerpieces of his campaign, some seem fairly doable. The free buses. I don't know if we'll get 100% free buses, but certainly you'll get expanded free bus service. That seems like something you'll get. The grocery stores, hard to say. It's one per borough, or five total, I believe. I'm not sure if it's one per borough, but that it won't be a game changer on prices.
Pilot program.
Pilot program. Yeah. But it seems like you'll get something out of that. The one that's the minimum wage, I don't know how that will go, but the one that I did want to ask you about was the taxes. Now, he has said that he wanted to raise it in the top 2% of New Yorkers. The thing I absolutely don't believe whatsoever is that a bunch of them are just going to leave New York as a consequence.
They never do.
Yeah, they always the data to that is very clear. They don't really go. However, he is held up by the fact that the governor ultimately has to approve, I believe, the vast majority of these. How much of an uphill climb does he face with Governor Kathy Hochul?
So, funny enough, this has happened before. When our former mayor, Bill de Blasio, he campaigned on pre-K, right? Pre-K for all, which ended up being 3K as well later on in his term. And he said he was going to tax the rich. And people said the same thing to him. The New York Times went after him so hard. They did not endorse him in the primary. They later did in the general, which is probably what's going to happen with Zohran as well. And they said this is unfeasible. Like, you can't do this, especially with Andrew Cuomo. And Andrew Cuomo is about as difficult as a person to operate under. And if folks don't know, Andrew Cuomo and Bill de Blasio do not like each other. They had a long history. They worked at HUD together. Andrew Cuomo was Bill de Blasio's boss at HUD when he was regional director. They had a long history, but when Mayor de Blasio, Bill was the mayor, he was trying to push agenda items, and Governor Cuomo did not want to look like the bad guy. So he orchestrated this scheme where he got, 8 Democrats to caucus with Republicans so that they could block legislation so that Andrew Cuomo didn't have to veto progressive legislation. So it was as difficult as you can imagine to tax the wealthy to pay for pre-K. And it still happened. And it had to do with organizing. It had to do with pressure. And this is Andrew Cuomo, who is not an easy person to pressure. I think Kathy Hochul is going to realize that you can do a lot more with taxing the wealthy. You could tax real estate. There's a lot of different pathways here. The wealthy aren't going to leave. Maybe, there was an interview yesterday with Sean Hannity and Ron DeSantis. And Ron DeSantis said, all these people are going to be moving to Florida like they did under de Blasio from New York. And it was like he was criticizing it. And I was like, but it's your tax break policies. They're not moving because of the taxes in New York. They're moving because you're offering, no taxes in Florida. We all know what the deal is. But again, it's just their secondary residence versus their primary residence. They're still in New York. They're still, they're exploiting the system. They're getting subsidies. They're using the services of New York. So I think, there's lots of ways to go at this. And I think that the pathway is much easier this time around with a much more progressive state legislature that did not exist in the de Blasio years, a incredibly progressive city council, which will just reinforce everything. Not that they have that much of a role in it. And of course, Zohran and Kathy Hochul, who is vulnerable. She does not have the same personality as Andrew Cuomo. She, has a challenger right now from the right. But she also needs to show that she can stand up to Trump. And she knows that her state is far more progressive than it has been over the years. So I think if Zohran learns lessons of the de Blasio administration and does not pay attention to what the Wall Street Journal editorial board says, and organizes and keeps the organization he has right now and mobilizes these folks into championing and organizing around the policies he envisions, I think that we'll be in a really good place. And it's a great model for other cities too.
Indeed. One thing that caught my attention, I don't know if it should have or not, so help me out here. I used to live in the financial district long time ago. I lived on Nassau Street right by the stock exchange.
Exactly.
And then I was looking at the map where Mamdani had won, and he picked up Battery Park as well as the financial district, which I could not believe. Am I right to be surprised that he won those districts?
Absolutely. You look at some of these districts and it's so funny because Andrew Cuomo's people are like, oh, he was winning with wealthy people. It's like, no, he was winning across the board. You guys lost. Like, that's what happened. working people, ethnic people, Black communities, white communities, educated, like the highly educated communities, the finance communities. That map is an inspirational map. Now, is there still work to be done? Absolutely, always. This is a complicated city. We have low turnout elections, even though turnout was higher than it's been since David Dinkins when he ran. But yeah, no, I was definitely surprised because the people who live in FIDI, the financial district, are usually people in finance. It's expensive to live in Manhattan. So if anybody's moved to Manhattan in the last 10 years, they probably have a little bit more money than the rest of New York. So it's interesting to see that Manhattan map. And it just speaks to, I think affordability is hitting everyone. I don't think this is just a working class issue anymore in New York. The average rents are through the roof. In Manhattan, I think it's like a 1-bedroom average rent is like $5,000 or something at this point, or $4,700. In where I live in Queens, when I bring up I live in Astoria to folks that haven't lived in New York in a long time, they're like, oh, interesting. Like, the Manhattan mindset. And I'm like, it's the fastest growing neighborhood in America right now. Greenpoint, Astoria, Williamsburg, these Long Island City. There's a whole waterfront that's been developed, and these apartments are going across the street. I looked at one just to see comparable. One bedroom is going for $4,400 a month. A month. And I know people have rent stabilized apartments that are paying, $5,000 for a 2-bedroom apartment. It's not sustainable. It's our minimum wage isn't high enough. The wages aren't high enough. And then when you think we didn't even talk about commercial real estate, small businesses, you wonder why. When I ran for public advocate, we had a meme that was going around of a cup of coffee, an iced coffee. Because iced coffees back then were going for $7 a pop. Now they're like 11. I had one this morning. I'm like, okay, $11. And you'd say, well, why is my coffee so expensive? And we filled it up. We're like, cost of milk was, 20 cents, or cost of the coffee was like $1.50. The water was like 5 cents. And then the rest was just rent. And that's what it was. And like Fox News likes to say, it's because the minimum wage has gone up. That had like nothing to do. That was like $1 of your cup of coffee. It had to do with the rent. So commercial real estate also, there's a bill through the city council that has been held up for years. Landlords are warehousing. They're taking advantage of all this money coming in from out of the country that is just there to stash cash. It's an interesting time, but I think fundamentally, unless you're a billionaire in New York, these prices are hurting everybody.
New York is, I love New York so much, but listen, it's tough to be poor anywhere, but it's tough being poor in New York City, not least of which is because there's so many things that would otherwise be accessible that a lot of other places that are, where you don't have money, it's not even a relevant factor, but to be next to, even ordinary things, food is expensive, rent is expensive. I guess the subway is pretty affordable, generally speaking, but it's just
it's more expensive than it was, and it's not dependable anymore.
Yeah, and I can only say this, I was broke when I lived in New York City, and it was tough. It's a tough place to be when you're broke.